Welcome to False Flag Weekly News. I'm Kevin Barrett saying World War III will not be televised, but you can watch it on the internet. And if you want the truth about it, you should watch False Flag Weekly News. Every week, we peel back the lying mainstream headlines to get at what's really going on. And with me today is our regular commentator, Helen Byniski of helenofdestroy.com. Welcome, Helen. How are you?
Good to be here. Not so good about the whole World War III thing.
Well, good to still be here. So far, we're not smoking radioactive holes in the ground, but give Trump another day or two, and we'll see how that goes. So let me see if I can get my screen back. There we go. I didn't have time to prepare properly for this amazing lineup of 35 stories we have because that lunatic in chief. Well, we'll get to that. First, our obligatory disclaimer. If the truth hurts, either suck it up or turn the channel and watch something else. Many viewers find the truth about these issues disturbing. Any such people or people who are underage or mentally immature, emotionally fragile, or anything like that really should be watching cat videos or something other than False Flag Weekly News. But people who can handle the truth and know that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, at least when it comes to the truth, should keep watching. And should not only do that, but should also send emails to ffwn@noliesradio.org. Put join in the subject line. And when we get censored and pushed off of wherever we may be at the time, whatever platform we're on, we will alert you to what the new platform is. And especially as World War III looms, that might be important. So please do email us so we can stay in touch with you, assuming we're all still alive next week. Oh yeah, let's get moving here. Where should we start? Well, I guess with the, wait a second. I think we're on the wrong slide here. We have to give a PSA first for this interesting new conference. Okay, first, we all know that conspiracy theories are often true and that everybody knows Epstein didn't kill himself and that this is a domestic terrorism threat. So I guess that's part of our obligatory disclaimer. And then let's do our quick PSA for the No Lies Radio live streamed Politics of Defense Spending. This will be coming up on which day is that? January 7th. That's coming up very soon. It's 9:30 Pacific or 8:30 Pacific. Wait a second. It can't be 8:30 p.m. Pacific. Yeah, 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, I guess that's right. Okay. Let's get on to the stories because we got a lot going this week. So quick tribute to the martyred General Soleimani, the greatest military hero of the 21st century, single most important figure in defeating the Daesh or ISIS terrorists in Iraq and Syria, in helping Hezbollah deter another Israeli attack on the Middle East. And, what can we say? Our prayers go out to General Soleimani, and our prayers also go out to have the people, if they're people, the demons who killed him, head for hell as quickly and painfully as possible. Next slide. I just tweeted about this. It's quite a contrast, Soleimani versus Trump. Soleimani being a pious, God-fearing, highly intelligent individual, and Trump being the opposite in all respects. Helen, what do you make of the difference between this Iranian leadership, which at the very top has profoundly decent, spiritual, highly intelligent people, and the U.S. leadership, which features Donald Trump in the lead position?
Well, I could say that the Twitter conversation last night really told the whole story. You had all the Trump fans tweeting, all suddenly getting this rush of testosterone that I guess they've never felt in their lives before. And I personally cautioned against them. Do not tie your manhood, your newly found manhood, to this unwinnable war, because you're not going to be very happy if you can only get it up when somebody is getting bombed. It's really disgusting how they take this as a personal source of pride. And these are Trump's supporters. These are Trump's biggest boosters. These are the ones who want to abandon him under any circumstances. And these people are all just bloodthirsty little rats. They don't see these Iranian military commanders. So, the one Iranian military commander, Soleimani, who, as you said, is probably one of the greatest strategists of his era, and the Iraqi PMU commanders who were killed. They don't see these as people. They just take whatever narrative they're fed about these people being responsible for the deaths of hundreds of, or now it's millions. It was hundreds, now it's millions, because when you kill a boogeyman, you got to pin as many crimes on him as possible. Every unsolved murder in the last like 50 years is now, oh, Soleimani did it. Yeah, it was totally Soleimani. He's responsible for everything that went wrong ever. So it's really ugly. This rush to pin everything and to say all these really stupid, not well thought out things about how, oh yeah, the Iraqis are dancing in the streets because we've liberated them from this monster. It's like, wait, what? Iran got Iraq back on its feet after. Yeah, exactly.
Candy and flowers. Right. Yep. Candy and flowers. And the profound irony here is that Trump's political support came from him saying things like the Iraq invasion was the worst mistake the U.S. ever made in its entire history, and that Bush should have been impeached for it. That's why the only smart people who voted for Trump or supported him did it on the basis of statements like that. So Trump may still maintain his diehard support of drooling idiots, but he's going to lose a lot of the people who are paying attention. I write for American Free Press, which is a very pro-Trump rag, Pat Buchanan home and things like that. And I just had some exchanges with the editor there. He says, feel free to rip Trump a new one on this. And my only question is whether, what about all these idiots who have bought into the Trump garbage, hook, line, and sinker? This guy is the most obvious foreign agent in all of history. He's a moron, a 30 or 40 IQ agent of a hostile foreign power that repeatedly attacks and murders Americans, namely the state of Israel. And that's what he's always been. He's a gangster. He's a money launderer. He's a small-time frontman for the Kosher Nostra, and he always has been, and he always will be. And that's all he's ever been. And the rest is just nonsense. And when these people are going to see it.
Some of his spurned supporters last night were posting these old tweets where he's talking about how Obama is going to bomb Iran to get reelected, and Obama's going to bomb Iran, and Obama shouldn't bomb Iran because that would be a really stupid, foolish thing to do. And all these tweets talking about Obama doing exactly what Trump has just done. So it's just, some of his supporters are waking up. Some of them are not stupid. The ones you work with, I'm assuming, and there are plenty of conservatives who last night were on social media expressing their disappointment, let's say. And it's just, why throw your entire support under the bus? As you said, the intelligent supporters of Trump were the ones that thought he was going to get us out of wars. Now those intelligent supporters have realized, no, it's actually, it's somebody, Trump posted a big American flag after he murdered these upstanding, intelligent, much more intelligent than he will ever be, people. And somebody tweeted back, you misspelled, and then he posted Israeli flag. I think that really sums it up.
Yeah, well, one of the smartest people who has any kind of communication with Trump supporters I know is Ron Unz at the Unz Review, whose IQ is supposedly a lot higher than I ever realized IQs went. And Ron, in our conversations, has said that he thinks that 9/11 truth and all kinds of other truths, all the red pill issues that Ron discusses in his American Pravda columns at Unz Review will come out eventually. And the likely scenario is that these idiots are going to blunder into a losing war and simultaneously an economic crunch. And the peasants with torches and pitchforks, some of the same idiots who are tweeting support for Trump now, as well as some, normal, intelligent people, are going to be so angry that it's going to be like the French Revolution, only exponentially more intense. And when that happens, when this country is torn apart by the chickens coming home to roost for these lies, starting with the 9/11 inside job, I guess didn't start then, but it was the biggest flagship of the lies. When this comes home to roost, that's it. The people who will be seen as having been responsible for this, some of them correctly, and probably everybody with any money to some extent. This country is just going to go up in flames. That's my prediction. It could go up in flames quicker, though. Russia and China and Iran are running joint naval drills. So this act of war against both Iraq and Iran, close allies of Russia and China, happened right in the middle or at the tail end of these 4 days of joint naval drills. And that, we're not living in an era where the U.S. can just do any damn thing it wants anymore. As we see in the next slide, I just did a show with Professor Anthony Hall, Tony of False Flag Weekly News. Shout out to Tony, talking about how the American century is in 2020 obviously totally finished. Looks like Trump's neocons want to finish it off even faster and take the risk it's all going to go up in radioactive flames.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't really been the American century in a while. It's been the Israeli half century after, yeah, the American century maybe for the first half of the 20th century. But the second half, I mean, it's been entirely a puppet state, and it's just disintegrating further and further. I mean, I almost think that like the need, quote unquote, to take out Soleimani arose from this joint military drill. I mean, I'm guessing that Pompeo or somebody, not Trump, because I don't think he has many independent thoughts of this nature. He has independent thoughts about other things, but not about this. Pompeo probably came up to him and said, hey, Iran is getting awfully close with Russia and China. You know, we might want to do something because, you know, they're with their malevolent threat streams, all these other like terms that they make up. Oh, they're responsible for so many malevolent acts, and then it was provocations and threat streams, and it's like, if you can't come up with anything real that they've actually done, maybe you should just sit down, sit down.
Well, if the real reason for killing Soleimani was that he destroyed America's mercenaries, namely the Daesh, ISIS terrorists, then I suppose that would make a certain amount of twisted sense. But in any case, we all know who's really behind this, and we all know who really owns Trump. We all know who really put Trump in office, and it wasn't Russia. And more people are waking up to who occupies America, the hostile foreign power that cemented its ownership of the United States with the false flag event of September 11th, 2001. And somebody graffitied something to that effect on London shops and cafes. The BBC went ballistic. Apparently, the truth is anti-Semitic. And in the next slide, we see Jewish Voices for Labor, which is this lynching group, a lynch mob that essentially destroyed Jeremy Corbyn's sure election to lead the UK. They're the point men for Israel, which owns the UK just like it owns the United States. Of course, they are whining and crying about calling this anti-Semitic when it is simply the truth. And in the next slide, let's jump to one more slide here. My colleague Ian Greenhall, who's on the show sometimes, wrote a great piece pointing out that this graffiti is just one example of more and more people all over the world, especially here in the West, the US and the UK, waking up and understanding that September 11th, 2001 was a hostile takeover, a murderous act of war by Israel against the United States. Israel still owns the United States, and it's Israel that is marching Donald Trump at gunpoint, or maybe a Jeffrey Epstein picture point, into a war on Iran that will destroy the United States and can only benefit Israel.
Well, I think that calling it anti-Semitic is really quite disingenuous of these people because, I mean, they made the Israeli flag have a Star of David on it for a particular reason, and that was so that, you know, if anyone uses this symbol in a particular way, they could say, oh, they're talking about
it's the Israeli flag.
Yeah, exactly. And they want to, you know, they want to be able to use one or the other as the situation dictates. So if it's there in a good context, like, oh yeah, that's about the state of Israel. If it's there in a bad context, how dare they say that about Jews? So it's one or the other. And obviously, it's not really anti-Semitic to point out the truth, but you have to. I mean, yeah, Jewish Voice for Labor. No, those are the people who are like, oh yeah, we want Tony Blair back. Yeah, sure, Tony Blair, the guy. Yeah, that's all we need. I mean, we have time warp here. They would have a time warp over there.
Well, they had to destroy Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn's a 9/11 truther. His best friend was Michael Meacher, who wrote endorsements of David Ray Griffin's work for The Guardian, and then was murdered just in time for Corbyn to take over as the Labour Party leader. So this is coming home to roost. It's another of the conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. There was a list recently published in an Australian mainstream paper pointing out that the CIA did do mind control. The government recruited Nazis after World War II, has done false flag terror against its own people, Gladio, and so on and so forth. Well, Israel doing 9/11 is a conspiracy theory that not only is obviously true, but more and more people are seeing it. And that may be the reason that the Kosher Nostra is using their front man, the moron Donald Trump, to march into a war to destroy Iran for the benefit of Israel at this moment. They're fleeing forward. The phenomenon of a flight forward is that when you're cornered, and the Israelis are cornered, the world is waking up to what they did on 9/11 and what they've been doing throughout their bloody history. When you're cornered, you know, you're like a vicious rat. You lash out, you flee forward, you start a bigger war, so the fog of war will obscure your guilt, and maybe you'll keep getting away with it. That's what all of these post 9/11 wars have been about. Why do they keep going on? Because if peace ever breaks out, it will immediately become obvious. As soon as the state of emergency ends and people can think rationally again, they'll see what happened on 9/11, and that's it for Israel. It's gone. That's it for the people who own the Federal Reserve. They're gone. That's it for the people who own the U.S. media. They're gone. It'll be a whole new ballgame, and it can't happen soon enough for me.
Yeah, and that's why you see this increasing mass psychosis, because they're trying to keep up this state of fear, but it's very difficult to maintain a state of fear, especially a manufactured fear, for so long, because it's just the brain doesn't work that way. You can't constantly have the amygdala going, like it doesn't, so you have to keep coming up with new things to be afraid of. And so first it was obviously Muslim terrorists, and then after Muslim terrorists, kind of the bloom was off the rose there, then they had to come up with scarier Muslim terrorists, hence ISIS. And then after ISIS was kind of like, okay, well, we can't really go any further. We're chopping people's heads off in Technicolor, burning them alive in cages, whatever. So then it was like the Russians. And now the Russians, I mean, the Russians has kind of fallen on its face. So now it's Iranians, I guess. And they just keep cycling through these things. And obviously, if you're trying to keep people in a state of fear for going on 20 years now, it's just, people are going to start going a little crazy. And I think that's what we're seeing.
And of course, the way this is reported by the mainstream media and most of the alternative media reflects the extreme ethnic bias and cultural psychosis of the people who run it. And this anti-Semitism hysteria that's run rampant. Every time there's a crime and the victim happens to be Jewish, it feeds into this anti-Semitism narrative. And so we had a tragic stabbing in New York where some people got killed. Some crazy guy stabbed people at a Hanukkah party. And this is being spun as if it were all about, hatred of Jews in general, when in fact, to the extent that there's any larger significance to this crazy person doing this horrible crime, as we see in the next slide, there has been a turf war between this Orthodox Jewish community, which is doing hostile takeovers of black neighborhoods, and not just black neighborhoods, other neighborhoods, forcing people out through really ugly, nefarious means. And there's, of course, resistance in some of these black neighborhoods, just like the Palestinians are resisting the genocide there. And so there's bad blood between these two communities. Yet in the mainstream in the United States, when there is any kind of conflict between a Jewish community and a non-Jewish community, the non-Jewish community's perspective is always completely censored and ignored, and then the Jewish community's perspective is wildly exaggerated. This happens in every conflict, and the master narrative of anti-Semitism, the idea that the whole world has always hated Jewish communities wherever they've gone, every place they've gone, people have hated them for no reason, only because maybe they were better and smarter and stuff. That's the official story, and it's absurd. There have been conflicts between Jewish and non-Jewish communities everywhere the Jews have gone, just like there have been conflicts everywhere between all sorts of different communities. And there are always two sides to every story. But we're only allowed to hear one side whenever the Jews are involved. This is so insane, absurd, and obscene, and it is backfiring because more and more people get so upset about this insane level of one-sidedness of this discourse, that they become genuinely full of hatred against Jewish people, which is very sad because most Jewish people are just like everybody else, only more so. They're just normal schmucks. But the Jewish community is going to reap the whirlwind on this, and I wish more ordinary Jewish people would stand up and call this out.
Indeed, because they're definitely going to suffer for what their more powerful brethren are doing. I mean, what this Hanukkah stabbing is going to be used for. They found the guy covered with blood all over him. They found in his home like some diary with anti-Semitic writings in it, and they said, oh, he had visited anti-Semitic sites online. So this is going to be used to enact some very stringent internet censorship. The ADL has already got some bills in the work because, of course, they do. I mean, it's not like they knew this was coming before it happened or anything. Wink, wink. It's not like, some crazy guy just gets it into his head to go and stab a bunch of Jews in a Hanukkah party. Like, that doesn't even really make sense. The guy was unhinged. I mean, that was a fact, clearly. I don't see any logical reason why he would have done this. So something tells me that he was encouraged to do this, to create a crisis, to have a solution lying by in the ADL's so capable hands. And these situations where large Hasidic communities move into these places upstate, and then they start taking over the school boards. And the thing is, they don't send their kids to public schools, so they just take the money from the school boards and they use it for whatever. And the kids who are still there, who haven't been pushed out yet, suffer for it. And the families who are still there, are really in a bind because if they speak out, they're labeled anti-Semitic. And so it's some places have succeeded in fighting back, some have not, some have been taken over. And what's also interesting is that I think this one upstate was one of these. A lot of these anti-Semitic incidents incidentally seem to happen to non-Zionist Jews. And this is what we've seen for decades and decades, especially back in a certain World War II era. Non-Zionist Jews were the ones that got wiped out. Now, golly gee, why did that happen? I mean, it's almost like they knew to get rid of the non-Zionist ones to create more support for Zionism. But that's just, wild conspiracy theory and speculation. Just happens to be true.
Well, when I interviewed Rabbi Weiss of Neturei Karta, a leading anti-Zionist Jewish organization, several years ago, and the only reason I was able to get that interview with Rabbi Weiss was that he had been warned by Turkish intelligence to absolutely not get on the Mavi Marmara. They knew that the Israelis were actually not only planning an attack on the Mavi Marmara, but they were likely to murder, there were targeted killings planned in advance. And he was told that he wouldn't survive that trip. He was not allowed to get on the boat. He wanted to be on the Mavi Marmara. And had he gotten on that boat, the Zionists would have murdered him the same way the Zionists have murdered so many other good people, Jewish and non-Jewish, who stand in the way of their genocidal project. Well, Columbia University has some people very lightly and gingerly trying to stand in the way of Zionist genocide of Palestine. And of course, they're being criticized as evil racists, when in fact, what they're doing is standing up against a racist genocide.
Oh yeah, this kid is a scumbag. Total scumbag. I mean, the college atmosphere is so like kid gloves, so like sensitive, so not offending anybody. And if this kid is who didn't say he served in the IDF or something, it's like if this dude served in the military and he's coming to Columbia and he can't handle some professors with challenging ideas, then this is a total manufactured thing. And this is just, to get some legal precedents in place so we can start doing it to everybody. I mean, because people get into Palestinian justice when they're in college because they're learning about new things and they're waking up to the injustices of the world. And it's a good time to open people's eyes to these things. So that's why they want to stomp on it and smother it while it's still young.
And I hope the American people wake up and understand who is destroying our constitutional rights, who is dragging us into these genocidal wars, who's dragging us into possible World War III. I hope they wake up to this before 90% of us are dead and breathing radioactive air, because it's looking like that's what it's likely to come to. And when that happens, and we know who did it to us, the survivors are not going to be very happy, to say the least. Well, let's get back to World War III starting yesterday. Qassem Soleimani, murdered by cowardly drone operators who were a bunch of total pussies. These I shouldn't use slurs that would refer to this or that group to describe these vicious cowards who operate drones, who are afraid to fight their enemy face to face. These people are such scumbags. It's really unfortunate that they exist. And the only good thing about their existence is the torture, the eternal torture that they will suffer in hell when they die, as they inevitably will, the sooner the better. But General Soleimani is a great man, a spiritual man, a highly intelligent man, and by far the most popular man in Iran. Polls taken by groups that Western media actually accepts and believes have put his popularity at well over 80%, vastly higher than the same kinds of polls show for anybody else in Iran. So if you really want to unite the people of Iran and indeed the whole axis of resistance against you, this is the perfect way to do it. It's like, as I said on Press TV earlier this morning, if in 1946, after the US-Russian Allied victory over the Germans, if the Russians had suddenly murdered George Patton, Dwight Eisenhower, and Douglas MacArthur all on the same day, these were the heroic generals who had won the war. The American people, of course, would not have taken that lying down. It would have absolutely meant war, all-out war with Russia, one way or another. And likewise, this means not only Iran, not only the axis of resistance, but all decent people all over the world are now absolutely at all-out war with the Zionist-occupied USA, which is going down in flames sooner or later.
Yeah, and this whole idea of, oh yeah, the Iraqis are dancing in the streets because they're liberated. It's like, no, actually, you've just convinced the Iraqis to band together and kick your ass out because nobody wants the U.S. in their country, and certainly now they're going to be more empowered to do so. I mean, there's just the fact that the embassy was able to be surrounded and people protesting the other day, and then now this happens, and yeah, like you said, it united the entire region against us, which. Yeah, great. So maybe Trump will get reelected. Is that really worth blowing up the world? I don't think so.
And of course, we assume that the Iranian response will be an intelligent one. I mean, if any of my Iranian friends are dumb enough to be thinking about killing, let's say, Donald Trump in retaliation, if they are yearning in their hearts for the slow, excruciating, painful death of the narcissistic scumbag in chief, well, they're in good company. Probably about 100 million Americans are also dreaming about the slow, painful, excruciating death of their worthless, moronic scumbag who's camped out in the White House. But 150 million want him impeached, so probably about 100 million would actually shoot him in the head if they could get away with it. So this is the most unpopular, the most hated and reviled leader that the U.S. has ever had, even though he has a certain 30% of fervent supporters and another 20% who sort of aren't paying attention. Half the American people hate his guts. And of that group, as I said, I think the majority, if they could get away with putting a gun to his head and pulling the trigger, they would love to. I mean, I talked to just ordinary liberal types in Madison, Wisconsin, educated people in my part of the country. The level of disgust with what's happened to the United States since this most narcissistic, psychopathic person, of somebody that anybody with eyes can see in five seconds of watching him, is the most pathological individual ever to occupy the Oval Office, which is really saying a lot,
I don't see there. I have to disagree. There have been much worse presidents than Trump, and I think that most liberals hate him for the wrong reasons.
Obviously, they weren't so visibly pathological.
Yeah, Trump. I mean, no, but that's actually better, because when they have this mask of gentility on them, people are fooled by that. People were fooled by Obama. People were even fooled by Bush. Nobody's fooled by Trump. I would say that that's actually better than having some smooth talking guy.
Yeah, exactly, and that's my point. Yeah. That's actually my point in my message to the people in Iran, is that, if anybody was even thinking of going after Trump as retaliation, that would be the world's worst strategic mistake imaginable, because having such a widely loathed and despicable idiot as the leader and icon of your enemy is the greatest blessing that God could ever bestow upon you. So rather than taking out Trump, Iran should do everything in its power to protect the life of Donald J. Trump, Iran's greatest strategic asset in what has now become its all-out defensive war against the aggressive war that was just declared by Israeli-occupied USA. So I think Iran has some really good security people, and they should be volunteering to come help protect the life of the widely despised President Trump, who has 100 million Americans who would love to come gunning for them if they could get away with it.
Yeah, it's just so funny that liberals have decided that Trump is the worst president ever. And when you ask them why, they come up with some nebulous reason that they can't really find anything to support. Oh, he's racist. Oh, so like what president wasn't? Oh, yeah. He's sexist. Okay, again. They really don't have anything to back up their visceral loathing, except just that they've been bombarded with media images for 3 straight years. And
no, they're right about his character. I mean, the guy is the most insane narcissist. Have you ever seen anybody in your life who's that obviously narcissistic? And if you have, I pity you.
I mean, it's kind of a cartoon, though. It's almost like he's playing a character. I mean, it's like you have to be a narcissist to want to be president in the first place, for one thing. So again, it's just a question of like the aesthetics of the whole thing. Like, okay, so Obama was a more restrained narcissist, a narcissist who hid it better, that he was a psychopath. Again, it's all about aesthetics. These people they don't like the fact that their country is being made the laughing stock of the world. And to that I say, well, you should have thought of that.
Blame them? Yeah. You got to give the liberals their due when they're, right about something once in a blue moon. So anyway, moving on to Iraq, where World War III is beginning even as we speak. This week included the protesters going after the U.S. embassy in Iraq, chanting "Death to America." I was in the middle of like 5 million Iranians celebrating the revolution, and they asked me, oh, you're American. You think maybe we should change our slogan? I said, well, you might consider it. They said, well, it's not. We don't hate you. We don't hate your country. We just hate the leadership and its evil policies. But now, boy, the level of hatred is going to be going way, way, way up. And let's quickly go through these other stories about what happened in Iraq and the region this week. The U.S. murdered a bunch of Iraqi military people, and it's being portrayed in the American media as Iranians. They're not Iranians. They're an official part of the Iraqi military. It's like if the Iranians blew up the Green Berets or something and then said, oh, that's not American, that's actually Israeli. Well, there might be some tenuous link there. No, America's just murdered 30 important people in the Iraqi military. And so now Iraq is united against the United States, and that's why it's come to this. In the next slide, we have Fetzer, who's been leading the protests. He's anti-Iranian influence in Iraq and had been leaning sort of towards that side in these protests. And now he's flipped 100%, and he's reforming the Southern Army, and they are going to revive the anti-occupation forces in Iraq. That's why the U.S. just evacuated every American. Said every American's got to get out of Iraq because Americans are all targets there now, and justly so.
Yeah, I hope they stay out, and I hope they stay out of the region. And that would be if that happens, that would be a silver lining to this whole catastrophe. Because after, let's see, almost 17 years of occupation, I think it's time for the Americans to leave Iraq and leave them in peace and let them rebuild their damn country already. You see photos of before the occupation and after the occupation, and it's just tragic because this was an advanced society and it had a very, very long, rich history, and it's been completely looted and destroyed and reduced to rubble. And it's time to just get out and stop gloating. The whole green zone thing is just such a slap in the face of any Iraqi with any sense of country or pride or anything like that. So of course, yeah, they're going to surround it. That's going to be the locus of their rage, and I totally support that.
Yeah, it's time to get out and pay about $500 trillion in reparations for the genocide that the Israeli-occupied U.S. has perpetrated there. Well, in the next slide, we have the analysis from the supreme leader of Iran, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, who, of course, Trump doesn't know the difference between him and Ayatollah Khomeini, who founded the Islamic Republic. Trump repeatedly makes that mistake of confusing the two because he is the moron in chief after all. Well, the supreme leader of Iran, who is a very highly educated scholar and a very simple and pure-hearted man, which is why he was selected. He didn't even want to be the supreme leader, and they forced him to because he was the one guy that everybody loved and trusted and knew was a good guy. He says that this is partly because the success that they had, the General Soleimani and his allies had in defeating Daesh, who were in fact an American Israeli supported militia. And I think there's actually quite a bit of truth to that analysis.
Yep, I would say so. It's the ISIS was the US's baby. They needed that to stick around for a while so they could really get what they wanted in the region. And then Iran and Syria and Russia, of course, all worked together to get them out, and they weren't done wreaking their havoc yet. So yeah, I could see that being partly revenge motive.
And so the other wonderful leader of the Axis of Resistance, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, made interesting statements earlier this week, pointing out that Trump was on the verge of having a stroke over the success Iran has had, how it's been impervious to all of these regime change efforts, impervious to the plots that the Americans and their Zionist and Saudi friends were doing in Iraq, and that in fact even Yemen, which had no military capacity to speak of before the Saudis attacked it, has built up a very powerful military capacity that can take out Saudi oil facilities and shut down a major part of the world's oil supply if it wants to. And the Yemeni resistance forces, Ansarullah, are now reaching the point where they can even target Israel. So I think we are moving towards a situation where the Zionist genocide entity squatting in occupied Palestine is going to be going down in flames, possibly sooner rather than later.
That would be nice. It's time for the balance of power to shift, I think. They've had their time to really ruin millions and millions of lives. It's time for the people whose lives they've ruined to get a little bit of revenge, just a little bit. We don't need to go too far, but just make them feel what they've made others feel. I think that's just.
No, I think the Jewish squatters in occupied Palestine who would like to stay there and live peacefully with their neighbors should absolutely be allowed to stay and keep their property if it's within reason. And the ones who can only live in an ethnic supremacist state where they're exploiting and robbing their neighbors should be forced to leave. And if they fight, they should be fought and killed, obviously. So, I mean, the defensive war is the only kind of just war in the world, and there's never been a more obviously just and defensive war than the Palestinian struggle against the genocidal invasion of the Holy Land. Well, moving on to a less momentous topic, I think. How about Alex Jones having to cough up $100,000 to a Sandy Hook parent? That's our first Sandy Hook lawsuit story. The second one is that Jim Fetzer, who's also been sued and lost $250,000, I think it was, or something like that, to Lenny Posner, another Sandy Hook parent, is being challenged as a supposed fake Marine Corps ex-Marine. And so he's proved now, with my help, that he really was a Marine. I went through his old Marine Corps stuff. He has 2 trunks full of it, old uniforms and documents and stuff. So we went and photographed some of it and hung out with him at his house on Sunday after watching the Green Bay Packers win a wonderful comeback victory over the Detroit Lions.
Did you work in intelligence by any chance?
Jim? I know you don't like Jim, or if you knew Jim, you would know that he's far too unguarded. Nobody would hire him to work in intelligence.
Just asking. I mean, he's done a pretty good job making that topic radioactive so that nobody else can even go near it. Even if they have all the credibility in the world, it will all instantly evaporate the minute they walk within 5 feet of the Sandy Hook incident. So yeah, between him and Alex Jones, I mean, they've pretty well dragged that one through the mud. And so that's just why I would think that perhaps he was intelligence.
Yeah. Well, don't get me started on the Jim Fetzer School of Tact and Diplomacy, nor don't get me started on the errors that he makes and then stubbornly clings to them in the face.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, if you say that he's genuine in his thing, well, if he's genuine, then he would be willing to admit if he's wrong instead of clinging specifically to the errors and attacking anybody who tries to point them out. I mean, if you're genuinely interested in getting to the bottom of an incident, a conspiracy, or whatever, you want to know the facts. You don't want to cling to your like weird mistakes. I mean, unless you're just a pathological.
It's funny though. Jim actually sometimes does admit a mistake. For instance, he did buy me lunch when he had predicted that by like October 1st of whatever year that was, we would all be locked up in a Walmart gulag by the Jade Helm military exercises. And I said, I don't think so, Jim. And so he lost. He bought me lunch. He admitted he was wrong. And that's happened a few times. But when he really sinks his egotistical teeth into a story and like he's just sure he's right, it's really hard. It's like he's like a pit bull. Try to get the pit bull off your ankle. It ain't going to happen. So that's one reason that we haven't been able to continue with Jim here at False Flag Weekly News. But as a human being, he really, I like the guy. I love the guy. I mean, look around you, Helen. Look at these people you're looking at on Twitter. Look at the normal pro-Trump people, right?
Look, I know people who I think are working for intelligence who are really nice people, who I would consider friends. I just wouldn't trust them with like further than I could throw them because they're not genuine. I mean, they're nice people. They're fun to hang out with. But would you trust them? Would you believe them if they told you some wild conspiracy thing? Not necessarily. Not unless you get your facts really.
Well, if Jim Fetzer is a closet disinfo kind of guy, he certainly would deserve the Academy Award for method acting because I've never met a more palpably sincere person. I think the only reason, if you were going to try to make that case, you would have to claim that they've like planted a stubbornness chip in his brain or something like that.
I don't know the guy. I can't say, but all I know is
come and meet him and hang out with him. He's actually quite a lot of fun, and you don't have to spend that much time with him before you realize that he's totally sincere. He's just crazy professors, people who are really smart in certain respects, sometimes get a little off balance in others. And anyway, I don't want to discuss Jim Fetzer all day here. So let's move on to James Tracy, another Sandy Hook conspiracy theorist who's in the courtroom. So this is just a flashback to the story from last September where the media is just brutally mistreating Jim Tracy. So I know, Helen, you don't like either of these other two Sandy Hook conspiracy theorists, Alex Jones and Jim Fetzer. What do you think about James Tracy?
I actually had not heard of him before reading this article, so I don't know much about James Tracy. Sorry.
Okay.
Why? How does he compare to the other two?
Well, he comes off as a lot more sober and scholarly in certain ways, and honestly, I thought that what he did and said about Sandy Hook, for the most part, was much more obviously reasonable than, what we hear from various other quarters on YouTube and things like that. But he got ambushed and he got a raw deal. So, I think Fetzer got a raw deal in court too. I wrote about that at UNS. But
Oh, I think they all got raw deals, but it's just I think they all got screwed, and I don't think any of those cases were fair. But it's just that the first two at least were clearly designed to poison the well as far as that issue goes.
Mm-hmm. Well, who knows? So we'll drop the Sandy Hook conspiracy theories for the moment, and people, of course, can try to do their research on that, although it's harder and harder because we've got Google and YouTube and so on completely eliminating any trace of all of the evidence that's cited by the people who think that there's something goofy about the official version of Sandy Hook. And we're moving into that Orwellian world where we're all going to have to just believe when somebody says, the school was closed, it was all a drill, it was a FEMA drill to take our guns. Basically, sane people are going to have to just start believing that because we're living in such an Orwellian world. They won't even let us look at evidence to see whether the people saying such things are right or wrong. This censorship is completely backfiring. Anybody with a brain becomes more skeptical, not less, when they censor information. And of course, this is the case with Zionism, which has been censoring information for the whole world ever since this evil genocidal movement got started. And it's been presenting it just this big lie of propaganda ever since. And over in occupied Palestine now, I would nominate Bibi Netanyahu for Antichrist. He's going to stay out of jail maybe if there's a huge war that blows up the region, if not the world. And that's probably the real reason the war is starting. In our next Bibi Netanyahu slides, we have the first slide. He's going ballistic about these Hanukkah stabbings, which, as you said, Helen, very well could have been a false flag of some kind, and certainly are not an example of rising anti-Semitism that means Israel has to go out and kill millions more people. In the next slide, we see that over in occupied Palestine, Haaretz, the best newspaper there, has published this piece claiming that Netanyahu should not be allowed to start a war with Iran to save himself, which is what Trump, acting under Netanyahu's orders, has just done. It's to keep Bibi Netanyahu out of jail, to cover up 9/11, and so on and so forth. And in the next story, Phil Weiss at Mondo Weiss, former New York Times journalist, an excellent guy, a self-identified Jew who hasn't completely divorced his identity from his tribal background, but he's a very good guy. He's published this piece pointing out that the New York Times won't cover this. Haaretz will. Haaretz will say, look, Netanyahu's starting this huge war to keep himself out of jail. And he owns the United States. He owns Trump, and he's the one starting the war. The best newspaper in Israel will publish that, but the New York Times won't, because the New York Times is 100% Zionist propaganda all the time, as Phil Weiss knows. He used to work there.
Yeah, it's very interesting how in their own country they're free to criticize the government, but here, nope, we're a wholly owned subsidiary of Zionism Incorporated. It's really disgusting because this is the country that's supposed to have these free speech and all this stuff. No, we don't have that. I mean, it's increasingly becoming illegal to even criticize Israel because they're trying to say that, Jews are a country and Israel is a race. So if you criticize Israel, you're racist. Shut up. It's that doesn't even make sense. They just try to do these logical gymnastics and hope that they do them so quickly that you get confused and just go along, because nobody wants to get called a racist, right? That's a fate worse than death, is being called a racist. So nobody wants that. And so the word racism is losing its meaning, and people who are actual racists are getting away with it because people assume, racist, that's just what they call everybody. It's really kind of self-defeating unless you're a Zionist.
But if these boys who keep crying wolf about anti-Semitism continue much longer, the folks who are kind of saying, okay, yeah, whatever, at some point they're going to suddenly wake up and realize what's been done to them under this smokescreen, and it's not going to be pretty. And again, that's why anybody who really cares about trying to protect ordinary, decent Jewish people from the kind of anger that's going to arise from this repeated massive injustice going on, really needs to urge the ordinary Jewish people to stand up and tell the truth about these things, starting with 9/11. So in the next slide, we see the way this was reported in the United States. You'll never see in the United States anything about, Netanyahu just ordered his boy Trump to start a war with Iran to keep himself out of jail. The American media can't report that, even though the Israeli media can. So what we get on CNN is that, he's seeking immunity from prosecution, blah, 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 this kind of watered down nonsense.
The phoenix rising from the flames. That's could you crawl any further up his ass, you pathetic individual?
And that's CNN, yeah. So it's not just the New York Times that's occupied by the state of Israel. Our entire mainstream media is 100% Israeli occupied. And how can people be willing to allow their media to be run by a hostile foreign power that repeatedly mass murders them, mostly deceptively in false flags? It's just bizarre. Anyway, moving on to Donald Trump.
Giant form of Stockholm syndrome, I think. I mean, what would you call it? Like Tel Aviv syndrome or something.
Yeah, I guess. So Donald Trump, who's now starting what may very well become World War III on behalf of his master, Bibi Netanyahu, is using more and more of this apocalyptic, messianic religious language to describe who else? Himself. Mr. Holy Narcissist has been, retweeting people who call him the second coming of God, right? That was a while back. But now he's retweeting people who say that he is heaven sent. He's, saved America for Jesus. And, all of those drooling knuckle draggers who voted for Trump and are cheering for his insane starting World War III are probably bowing and thinking that, Trump is the second coming of Jesus, when in fact, obviously, Trump and people like him are more likely occupied by the evil spirits, if not the Antichrist himself.
Well, they want Trump to start World War III so they can have their rapture. I mean, that's the whole point of this, is they want to bring about the end of the world because they think that they're going to get raptured and be all special and that everybody else is going to burn in the fiery pit. But it's like, no, literally Mike Pompeo believes in the rapture. And he used to go around the CIA, buttonholing colleagues and talking to them about the rapture. And it's like, this is the guy we have as our secretary.
This is the guy who's going to be leading our war.
This is the guy, yeah. This is the guy. Really, this should scare everyone. It's not good. But yeah, this is what the Trump supporters are talking about when they're like, oh, he's the second coming. Oh, he's the king of whatever. And this is what's going on. These are the dominionist Christians who want a theocratic state rather. And this is very scary.
But not all the neocons are calling Trump the second coming of God. This week, David Frum, the guy who coined the term Axis of Evil, fanatical neocon psycho from Canada, he's part of this non-Trump group. I think maybe some of these guys realize that the path that they started down on 9/11 is kind of going in a bad direction. And so now he's calling Trump a gangster, which is actually totally correct. Trump has been a front man for the Kosher Nostra, that is organized crime, throughout his entire career. So sometimes the truth emerges even from the forked tongues of serpents.
But for the wrong reason here. I mean, he's not a gangster because he released the whistleblower's name that's been public for months. I mean, this is the stupidest thing in the world, this whole thing around the whistleblower. For one thing, he's not a whistleblower.
The headline is right. Gangster in the White House, that person.
Yeah, but everything else is wrong. This whistleblower wasn't on the call. He wasn't anywhere in the room. He heard it third hand or fourth hand or something. I remember reading the transcript and it was like a game of telephone, like the number of people in between the phone call and the whistleblower. And it's been public for months. So this is completely stupid. And
so maybe Frum will change his tune. And maybe the next thing you know, Frum will be writing about Trump being the second coming of God because now he's attacked Iran like Frum and his friends want. I don't know. Maybe we should move on to another front in this global war on Islam, which was launched by the 9/11 false flag operation. Over in India, the neighborhoods are emptying out. It's turning into an anti-Muslim Holocaust over there. And Modi is part of a group whose long-term plan, and they've been open about this for almost a century, which is as long as that group has been around. These Hindu psychos want the entire Indian subcontinent, which includes not only for India proper, but also Pakistan and Kashmir and Bangladesh, to have everybody who's not quote unquote Hindu, which is a rubric that includes all sorts of totally different people. They all have to be murdered or expelled. And that means hundreds and hundreds of millions of people are in line to be murdered and expelled from the Indian subcontinent. So this is one of the worst Holocausts ever in history brewing.
Yeah, good luck with that. Pakistan has nukes, and I don't think they'll be afraid to use them if you start butchering their citizens. But this is a nasty situation. I mean, you could kind of. I was on the fence about Modi. I wanted because everybody else was jumping on him, and I wasn't sure. And then I saw the picture of him with Henry Kissinger, And who was the other one? It was Henry Kissinger and some other completely evil person. He's just smiling, hanging out with them. I'm like, actually, everybody's probably right about Modi. He's a scumbag. So, yeah.
It's not just him. He's just a front man for a bunch of much smarter and more evil scumbags, sort of like Trump. So, speaking of Holocaust, okay, let's get back to the relatively minor compared to a lot of other Holocausts. One that we're told was the most important thing to remember about World War II. Holocaust wait a second. We got the terrorism in Afghanistan paying off the Taliban. Let's skip that one and move straight to more Holocaust stories.
I wrote this one. Come on, this one's awesome.
Oh, you wrote that? Well, then talk about it.
No, it's just the U.S. contractors, families of contractors who were murdered in terrorist attacks in Afghanistan are now suing the contractors for basically bribing the Taliban to leave them alone. What they would do is they would subcontract and subcontract and subcontract. So everybody's skimming a little bit off the top of these giant Pentagon contracts, and some of that money goes to the Taliban. They would basically pay the Taliban saying, "Don't do any terror attacks on us, leave us alone," and it would save them the money they would normally have to pay for security. But the problem is that not all the contractors paid off the Taliban. So the contractors that didn't pay them off would get the terrorist attacks and people would die. And so the families of these people are now going and suing the contractors who did pay off the Taliban to try to get some justice for their dead family members. Rather complex, but it's a completely sordid tale, and I would recommend people read the article. And there's a link, I think, to the lawsuit.
It sounds like the Taliban started a bidding war. So contractor A, pays off, and then Taliban, hits contractor B, and then contractor sees that, and they pay off a little more. I bet the Taliban did pretty well. No wonder they're winning that war.
Yep, basically.
Well, moving on to the Holocaust, that other Holocaust, the big H one, over here at UN's Review, Phil Giraldi, the former CIA officer, wrote a real good piece pointing out that this hemorrhaging of huge sums of money for Holocaust reparations to alleged Holocaust survivors, it's still flowing. It's a torrent. Like 2020, okay, when was this Holocaust? It supposedly started in the summer of 1942, which was the summer of the typhus epidemic, where vast amounts of Zyklon B or hydrogen cyanide gas were brought in to kill the lice that were causing the typhus epidemics to kill people in these camps. And this isn't a revisionist story. This is the official story. The official story admits that vast amounts of Zyklon B were used to kill the typhus-carrying lice. In any case, go to Ron Unz, go to unz.com and Google, Holocaust or whatever, DuckDuckGo it, because Google will not give you honest results
anymore.
Don't
Google
anything. Yeah, stick Google where the sun don't shine and use the others. Anyway, go to unz.com, get into their World War II revisionism articles, and yet somehow we're told that there are far more Holocaust survivors, not only than there were the whole population of Jews in the territories occupied by the Third Reich, but they're pretty much all on the dole. And even in 2020, a huge number are still alive, taking money.
You would think that they'd be dead by now. Unless they were
in 2120.
They were born in the camps. Maybe if they were born in the camps, they're still alive. But what they're doing now is, I think Phil Giraldi talks about this. They're trying to say that, the trauma is epigenetic. And so the children also have residual trauma because they might not have been born yet, but because their parents went through this terrible, terrible suffering, that they too have experienced suffering. And we must give them huge sums of money. So contribute. And if you don't contribute, we will take your shit.
Yep, it's quite a story. We don't have time to do justice to it or any other story with the format we've got. But let's talk about the way more. The rubric here is the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so the rich are still getting. Holocaust survivors are still surviving and sucking in huge piles of money. The world's richest 500 people gained 1.2 trillion in wealth in 2019. This is wealth that was taken out of the mouths of everybody else. Helen, for 2020, let's get a prediction from you. Do you think the rich will keep getting richer and the poor will keep getting poorer?
Unfortunately, yes. I don't see that changing anytime soon. To rise up against your oppressors, you have to be able to rise up off the couch, and Americans can't do that. A lot of other countries can't either. So that's a problem.
Well, some of them can. The Axis of Resistance people have been rising up off.
They can, yeah. But are they going to come over here and liberate the rest of us? I don't know about that.
I don't know. Well, maybe when the smart people wake up and figure out who's right and who's wrong about this and other things, there could be a pretty rapid change as things kind of coalesce when the tipping point is reached. Anyway, moving on to WikiLeaks. The The media, of course, won't even report anything about WikiLeaks. Caitlin Jostam won't report anything about 9/11 or half the other things we talk about on this show. But she's a good writer, and she will talk about WikiLeaks. So here's our story from Caitlin.
Yeah, I mean, it's so ridiculous how they're just like, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil on this one, because it just completely tears a big hole in the story. And a lot of us who knew this from the beginning can be saying, I told you so. But yeah, nobody's listening because, why would you listen to a bunch of loony nutcase conspiracy theorists, especially if they're right?
And, so the more things change, the more they stay the same. The media will suppress even, relatively harmless WikiLeaks stuff. And some WikiLeaks stuff wasn't so harmless, of course. Libya was destroyed because Hillary Clinton and her rich Zionist friends were afraid that Gaddafi's plan to start a gold-backed dinar would wreck Western currency, that is, take down the House of Rothschild. So that's why they destroyed Libya. That's all in the WikiLeaks Hillary Clinton emails. And so the more things change, the more they stay the same. The Ottomans are coming back to Libya. The Turkish Navy will be guarding Tripoli. And there's a big fight right now between Khalifa Haftar and this supposedly internationally recognized Libyan government, which is also illegitimate since the legitimate government was destroyed by the House of Rothschild. In any case, Libya will probably continue to be a mess in 2020, another pretty easy prediction.
Yeah, I don't see that changing anytime soon. I mean, Turkey's a bunch of scumbags. The other ones are a bunch of scumbags, US-backed scumbags. I don't see anything changing here.
Okay, and another thing that won't change in 2020 is that Hollywood will probably keep putting out garbage, and some of their garbage won't be woke enough for the woke people. In fact, some of their even decent films by Hollywood standards still won't be woke enough for the woke people. Little Women, the show, you follow the book, they were all white. And so it's taken a torrent of criticism from the forces of self-proclaimed moral correctness, or whatever they call themselves these days. Helen, you wrote this great piece.
I did,
Tell us about it.
Well, it's basically a bunch of uber woke critics decided that okay, well, maybe the film is about a bunch of women, and that should be, it's feminist, whatever, proto-feminist. It was written in an era before feminism, but that's clearly not enough. So there was one writer from Teen Vogue who said, well, I think that because one character wasn't exactly like they were in the book, that they should have just done what with one of the sisters should have been black. Well, wait, what? How does that work? The sisters, they're genetically related. Well, maybe the whole family should have been black in 1860s Massachusetts. That would totally have made sense. And just because there are so many different versions of Little Women, maybe one could say that, oh, well, they should have done it in this modern reimagining. Well, there was just one done like that, like in a comic book form last year. Maybe they didn't want to be derivative. The reasons that they're finding to evaluate movies on this wokeness scale has completely diverged from the purpose of a movie critic, which used to be to say, is this movie worth seeing or not? It's now no longer about, is this movie any good? Is it worth seeing? Do I want to sit down for 2 hours and watch this, or do I want to not do that? And now it's just, is it diverse enough? Is this movie going to allow me to virtue signal in front of my friends because I appreciated a diverse movie? And so this is critical privilege here. The critics are exerting their privilege to decide what movies should and should not be seen on a basis of nothing that has anything to do with quality, just on the basis of how warm and fuzzy it makes them feel in diversity centers of their brain. And the other guy is Armand White, and of course the joke is he's a gay black critic, but he's got white privilege because he's inflicting his terrible opinions. The guy has got the worst taste in movies that I've ever seen in a movie critic. But he said that this was all about the director exerting her white female privilege and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, you're the one exerting privilege here because you are the gatekeeper of people trust you to tell them what movies to see. And I'm just hoping that this woke empire of critics who have decided that quality is no longer important in films just fall and collapse, because I'm sure that Little Women was a crappy movie. It's pretty much guaranteed. It was a terrible book. It's a boring story. But it's not bad because it's not diverse. It's bad because it's bad. Like, let's just, get back to that.
Well, this virtue signaling and political correctness has become a substitute religion. Back in the good old days of the late 19th century, great literature was becoming a substitute religion as the educated classes were losing faith in Christianity. Well, today, more and more, including a lot of relatively uneducated classes, have also lost faith in any kind of transcendent basis for morality or even any kind of meaningful existence. And so what's left? Well, virtue signaling and buying into these ridiculous myths that take these people far away from any kind of actual reality into a kind of never land of trying to feel morally superior because of their idiocy. But it could be worse somewhere. Maybe it's worse over in Saudi Arabia. I hate to say it. I'm a Muslim, but frankly, this Saudi version of an Islamic country, I don't know. I'll take the insane woke America over this Ben Salman's psycho Saudi Arabia. So I wrote a kind of a slashing, as it were, satire about secular fun for beheading victims this week. I don't know if you got a chance to read that, Helen, and hopefully you didn't throw up if you did.
Yeah, it's really the fact that this guy is on the Human Rights Council for one thing. It's our whole human rights posturing is such a joke, and we've got people like this that we're propping up.
Yeah, and he's part of the reason that Trump's starting World War III by launching all-out war on Iran and Iraq last night. It's because of bin Salman and his master or friend Bibi Netanyahu. So I guess if you can't laugh at this stuff, then you'd pretty much have to suicide bomb somebody, I suppose. Fortunately, I'm a truth jihadi and a satirist. So the next slide, General Clark hurls the phone on CNN, and a lot of people said, why did he do that? If his phone rings on CNN, he just throws it away with amazing quickness. And so I just tweeted that it was my fault. I called him up to remind him to say that 9/11 was an inside job designed to take out 7 countries in 5 years, which I say quite often. He's probably tired of hearing me call him and say that.
That's funny because the day before that this happened, I had embedded the video of him doing that in one of my articles, and so maybe somebody called him to ask about that. Maybe that's what reminded you to call him and ask about that. I don't know where you thought of that.
But you call General Clark, you call the mainstream media, you call CBS News or MSNBC or CNN, or you call right to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and ask them to tell a little bit of truth about all of this stuff, starting with the 9/11 false flag. And what do? You get tumbleweeds. And so the killer tumbleweeds are engulfing America. This is our final story today from CBS. There are tumbleweeds just engulfing people out in the state of Washington, taking over highways, eating cars. And, maybe this would solve a lot of problems if the tumbleweeds would just kind of, eat up most of the United States and certainly go over and eat up the occupiers of Palestine. And they could thrive and be happy tumbleweeds, and the rest of the planet could live happily ever after.
No, this is just the most perfect thing this is like our version of a plague of locusts, because it really is. If you try to get anybody to pay attention to an important issue, tumbleweeds. And here we have tumbleweeds. This is reaping what we sow here.
It's a sign from Allah, and that's our last word today. So thank you, Helen Bajniski. It's always great talking with you, even on the eve of World War III. And God willing, if the world is still there next month, I guess, since you're on a monthly schedule, we'll reconnect then. Until then, have a great first month of 2020, or as great as you can.
Yeah, let's hope the world is still here next time.
Okay, that's a plan, inshallah. Take care, and thank you to all of our loyal viewers and supporters. We couldn't do it without you.